There's a moment in every long-running show where you start to see the person behind the persona, and for Paul Sinha, that moment has arrived not through a dramatic on-air scene, but through something far quieter and far more honest. A conversation about what happens when the job he loves eventually becomes too hard to keep doing. If you know Paul Sinha as the Sinnerman, you know him as sharp, quick, occasionally ruthless at that podium. What you might not immediately connect to that image is the fact that he's been living with Parkinson's disease since 2019, a diagnosis that came about in a genuinely striking way. A doctor happened to notice early symptoms while simply watching him on television. Think about that for a second. The very medium that made him a household face is also what helped catch the earliest sign that something was changing in his body. That diagnosis didn't arrive in isolation either. It followed 2 years of smaller, harder-to-connect symptoms, including a sudden and unexplained frozen shoulder and a type 2 diabetes diagnosis that came before anyone had pieced together the bigger picture. When you lay that timeline out, you start to understand just how disorienting that period must have been, piecing together seemingly unrelated symptoms until they finally added up to something with a name. Since then, Paul has done something a lot of public figures struggle with. He's talked about it. Openly, consistently, and without turning it into a performance of suffering. He's been honest that some days it's genuinely hard to tell what's Parkinson's and what's just the normal process of getting older, which is such a relatable human admission. It would be easy for someone in his position to draw a clean line and say, this symptom is the disease, this one is just life, but he's admitted that line isn't always clear, even to him. And yet, despite all of that uncertainty around his body, there's one place where he says his mind remains completely reliable, the quiz table. He's described something almost fascinating, a kind of switch that flips the moment he's in competition mode, where his recall becomes instant and sharp, even on days when he might struggle to remember something as simple as the name of a fellow comedian he worked with that same weekend. There's something almost poetic about that contrast, the idea that under pressure, in the exact environment where precision matters most, his brain finds a gear that everyday life doesn't always give him access to. But here's where the story shifts from inspiring to genuinely thought-provoking, because Paul hasn't just talked about managing his condition day to day. He's talked about the future, and he's done it with a level of clarity that's honestly a little disarming. He's made it known that if his ability to perform at that podium ever becomes compromised because of his health, he won't wait to be told to step aside. He'll make that call himself. He's described it in terms of not wanting to be a liability, not wanting to hold a position he no longer feels he's earning through ability alone, and choosing instead to leave with dignity intact rather than let the show or the audience watch him decline in real time. That's an extraordinarily difficult thing to say out loud about your own career, let alone plan for in advance. Most people, when faced with a progressive condition, understandably focus on managing the present and try not to think too far ahead. Paul appears to be doing something different, holding both at once, genuinely enjoying life as it is right now while also being brutally honest with himself about what the future might eventually require of him. He's been part of the chase since 2011, expanding across spin-offs like Beat the Chasers and Chase Around the World, building an entire identity around split-second recall and competitive sharpness. So when someone with that kind of career foundation talks openly about a future where that sharpness might not be guaranteed, it reframes how you watch every episode he's in going forward. Every quick answer starts to feel a little more meaningful, not because anything is currently wrong, but because he's given viewers a rare, honest window into just how aware he is of what this condition could eventually take from him. What's remarkable, though, is that none of this has pushed him toward pessimism. He's continued pursuing stand-up comedy alongside his quizzing work, and he's spoken about how his diagnosis has actually opened up a strange kind of connection with parts of his audience, particularly older viewers who might be dealing with their own health struggles. He's described feeling like he can speak to that experience in a way that resonates, using comedy not to avoid the hard truth of his diagnosis, but to help people sit with their own struggles a little more lightly. That's really the heart of why this story has stuck with so many viewers. It's not a tragedy, and Paul clearly refuses to let it be framed as one. It's a portrait of someone being remarkably clear-eyed about an uncertain future while still choosing every single day to show up, to compete, to make people laugh, and to be honest about exactly what that takes. So maybe the real question worth sitting with isn't when Paul Sinha might eventually step away from that podium. Maybe it's what it says about him that he's already decided, with total clarity, how he wants to handle that moment whenever it comes. What do you think it takes to plan for something like that so openly, while still living so fully in the present?